Well, happy Sunday, y'all. Everybody doing okay? We're good? All right? Man, first service was extra excited today as well, so I don't know what the deal is, but we got like a full week or two of summer under us. So awesome. Glad y'all are here. And special welcome to everybody joining us for church online today as well. Hey, before we jump in, I hope that you'll be here next week, which is Father's Day. And the gentle challenge is, hey, before we go out and honor our dads, let's maybe honor our father, if you know what I mean. And so I just want to encourage you to be here next week. And a couple of cool things are happening. One is the way that we're kind of connecting, as Shelby mentioned, after service throughout the morning is I understand we're building an island, like a floating green to put out in the water. So we can take a golf shot at it and hopefully win a gift certificate to Top Golf. So I hope they get it built soon so I can practice this week, but that'll be out there and some other cool things to do to connect with one another. But next Sunday, we'll also be welcoming a new addition to our church family and our staff team. So Matt Karst and his family will actually be here. Yep, that's a good thing. And officially be Camden residents. He'll actually be helping to lead worship for us next Sunday, so hopefully you'll be here for that. It's going to be awesome. So last week we started in this series that we're just simply calling Be the Branch, and we're going to be hanging out in John chapter 15 for the whole month of June, okay? So we're going to zero in on this stuff. If you had a hard copy of the scriptures, which I would encourage you to bring, open up to the middle, turn to the right, you'll go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, okay? John chapter 15. I would encourage you to maybe go to the app, and you're like, well, how do I get the app? Well, there's instructions in the back of the seat in front of you on how to do the app, but you can find message notes in the app if that's easier. You can do a lot of the things that Shelby talked about, find events. You can give and serve through the app, and so those are two amazing ways to get connected to the mission of our church. And so John chapter 15, let's start this way. The second Christmas, I guess, when my wife and I were married, I bought a Nintendo for us, okay? So you got to go back to 1993, the original, like, Nintendo, and our son Jordan was 6 months old at the time, so he basically grew up just watching us play the Nintendo, and we kind of let him sit there and, you know, cheer and do all that kind of thing. But it wasn't very long before he wanted to play. And if you have kids and you're like, listen, he can't play. He doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he's going to ruin everything. And so we would give him this controller, but it wasn't connected. So we would kind of like tuck it underneath the console, so maybe he thought that he was playing, but he wasn't actually playing, okay? So you do it the same thing. You do it other ways, all right? And so he could do a lot of things with that, okay? He could hold it. He could push buttons. He could yell at the bad guys. He could jump up and down and cheer, okay? So he could do a lot of things. He just couldn't do the most important thing, as you know it, right? He couldn't save the princess because he wasn't connected to the power source, if you follow me, which I think is a perfect way to describe what we're talking about and what we stepped into last week with this whole series that we're calling Be the Branch, okay? And so John 15, Jesus rolls out this very famous metaphor as he's talking to his disciples on the importance of having a proper connection to the source so that it will produce something amazing in your life, okay? And so it's very likely, I think, that Jesus delivers it or part of it while they are walking through a garden. And here's what he's saying, hey, it's just this is what it looks like to have a relationship with me, okay? As long as you stay connected to me, right, the amazing things are going to be produced in your life. And when you're disconnected, you're not going to be able to do anything. And so here, I just want to read most of it for us today. We'll do this most every week. Jesus starts out this way. He says, I'm the true vine, which means maybe there are some imitation vines. If you're looking for this or you need this, you're not going to find it anywhere else. Jesus, I'm the true vine. My Father's the gardener. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit, he removes. And we're going to look at that word today, removes. And he prunes, we'll look at that one as well, every branch that produces fruit so that it will produce more fruit. God's the gardener, okay? That's what Jesus is saying. Like, you picture him with the shears in hand. And by the way, as we go further in the next few minutes, you are not your own pruner. You are not your spouse's pruner. The person sitting next to you, that's not your job. God's the gardener, and he has a much bigger vision or a picture in mind for your life than even you do. Verse 3, you're already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me, I in you. Just as a branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains on the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. I'm the vine, and we spent time on this last week. You're the branches. So now we have all the players, okay? Jesus, the vine, God, the gardener, you and I play the part of the branch. The one who remains in me and I in him produces much fruit, because you can do nothing without me. If anyone does not remain in me, he's thrown aside like a branch and he withers. They gather them, they throw them into the fire, they're burned. And if you remain in me and my words remain in you, well, then you can ask whatever you want and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit and prove to be my disciples. So very simple. Jesus, hey, I'll be the vine, you be the branches. And we said this last week, you have one job, right? That's it. Just stay connected to Jesus. And one of the things that we did last week was to actually provide you with some resources on how to do that. And so if you had one of these from last week, or you can probably find one here around the building somewhere, on one side it talks about how we're connecting with each other, and that'll be, hey, this is what's happening outside or on the property throughout the morning. On the other side, connecting with Jesus. So as we spend the whole month of June in this passage, we provided you some extra resources. So there are books to read that may go along with what we're talking about. You can actually find a couple of them over in the cafe. There's a way to memorize John chapter 15, and we give you some tools for that. And then specifically, I want to point you back to what's called the Rule of Life Builder. And if you don't have this, you're not out of luck. If you just go to our website, ChristchurchCamden.com, on the front page, it says, Be the Branch, View the Resources. And if you go there, you'll find all this stuff. And I really want to route you to maybe go to that Rule of Life Builder. Specifically, what you'll find is the spiritual health reflection, okay, the spiritual health reflection. You can do this in just a matter of minutes. You answer some questions, and then it will spit out to you some next steps you can take, maybe some practices you can add to your life, some exercises and resources. And don't miss this, not to just add more things to your life to do, but as a way to help you connect to or stay connected to Jesus. So I would encourage you to go there. Now, when we read this, okay, when we're talking about be the branch, I actually see maybe 3 different types of branches. And I just want to hit this, okay? And I guess one's really a stick when you think about it, but there are sticks, and we just read this in verse 6, that used to be a branch, but it's no longer connected. Okay, Jesus said this in verse 6. It's not connected to me, right? You gather them up, you throw them into the fire, they're burned. Maybe it was a storm, maybe it was a disease. You all walk out after a tropical storm has come through town and there's things laying all over your yard. You pick them up, right? You put them in a pile, maybe you burn them. I don't know what the rule is around here. We burn them anyway. And then you just kind of do that. We'll talk more about that next week, okay? But I want to propose for our remaining time today that maybe there are actually 2 kinds of branches that are connected to the vine. And it's verse 2, and this is what I want to zero in on today. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit, he removes, that's an important word, and he prunes every branch, who's excited about that produces fruit, so it will produce more fruit. So I think it's easy to read what Jesus says as a whole here in John 15 and think, okay, I get it. There's really only 2 options, right? Either I'm cut back and I'm pruned, or I'm cut off and I'm removed. And I think we conclude as we're reading it, okay, here in verse 2, the branches we read in verse 2 that get removed, they must be the same as the branches in verse 6 that are disconnected. But when you read verse 6, it says clearly they're not connected at all. Okay, they're dried up, you bundle them, and then you throw them in the fire. In verse 2, it actually indicates that they're connected branches, they're just not producing. Okay, so I'm going to kind of roll with that thought today, and let's assume there are 2 connected branches. Number 1 would be connected and needs picked up. Okay, a connected branch that needs picked up. And it sounds like, and this is kind of touches on what we talked about last week a little bit, that if we don't produce good things, or we don't do enough good things, then God's just going to go, okay, forget it, and we're going to move on with it, right? But, okay, if God cuts off all branches that are not bearing fruit, and Jesus said, okay, your job is just stay connected, remain in me, That's the job. Then it sounds like, and this is my thinking, that you could be connected to the vine and not bearing fruit, okay? Now, your New Testament was written in Greek initially. We take the Greek language and we translate it to English, and that's how you get your Bible. And you end up with different versions of the Bible or translations based on maybe some of the newest research or, hey, how I interpret this word and you interpreted that word that way. And so it's important then because those words matter. So what the word is we're looking at is the word remove, or your version might say cut off. Okay, it's the Greek word airo, A-E-R-O, or sometimes it'll be spelled A-I-R-O. It's a general word. It can mean one of two things. It can mean remove, or it can actually mean lift up. Okay, so this is important, and you're going to have to engage your brain for a couple of minutes. But on the one hand, it makes sense that the gardener's removing dead and dying branches, right? Hey, that branch is dead right there. It just hasn't fallen off yet, and you touch it, and it's clearly it's dead, right? But an equally valid use of the word is picked up. Okay, God picks up, okay, or he lifts up dying branches. So picked up or cut off. Well, which is it? Well, let me turn it back on us for a second and say, okay, what do you do with a branch that seems to be connected, but in the way I'll describe it, is a little disappointing? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I see you're trying to do the job, but it's not really coming through. And I go, okay, well, what would I do if I was God? How would I deal with those kind of people? And this is easy because I've talked to a lot of people about this lately on how I do deal with those people. And if you're our guest today, this might be your only visit because this is going to be very honest this morning. And just to say it's a little early for this, I understand it. But when someone's disappointed me, or when someone's just ghosted me, like, hey, we were friends for the last 3 years and now you don't return my text? I mean, does that happen to anybody else? Okay, it's just me. Let's talk about me then. You were here, like you were a part of our church for the last 5 years and then gone, and like, I don't know where you ended up. Maybe they didn't come through. Is that better for you? Okay, they kind of left for, I don't know, better things, greener pastures, if they want to say it that way. My tendency is to say, oh, I don't need them. I don't need them. I don't need anything that they can do for me. I don't need anything they can provide for me. I don't want to be connected anymore. And I don't need to feel like I need to defend myself, because most of us, if we were honest, would go, yeah, that's what they deserve, isn't it? Be honest with me, please. Anyone? Okay, it's me. They walked away, right? They stepped away, and I kind of look behind at the trail of the bodies going, okay, it's starting to add up back there, and I see what I would do, okay? And you go, well, you have problems because I would never do that. But I guarantee that you have a short list on your phone called blocked contacts. Anybody else? And at some point, you're like, if they call one more time, oh, that's it. I did it. And it's somebody that bullied your child. It's someone that wants to date your daughter. It's somebody that like did work for you and they didn't come through. They owe you. It's a family member that has no boundaries, whatever. Let me show this word airo in a couple other places, and you can kind of get a feel for it. John uses this in a lot of places in his gospel, okay? Is a lame man by the pool, right? And he's trying to be healed. And John chapter 5, verse 8, Jesus tells him to get up, and here's the word, pick up, airo your mat and walk. John 8, angry mob trying to kill Jesus. Here's the word, so they arrowed stones to throw at him. So you have these branches who kind of stop bearing fruit. They've disappointed and they can't actually be counted on. What is God the gardener actually going to do? Which is it? Is he going to cut them off? Or is he possibly going to pick them up? And how you understand that has a lot of implications on your relationship with God. Maybe this will help. We have had 3 teenage drivers in our family over the years, and at the same time, they were all driving. And so they get their license, and then someone who either, hasn't had enough experience or they're irresponsible, they're always pushing the limit, right? Like, hey, you're always running on empty. Every time I get in here, it's empty. And so please put some gas in the vehicle. And then, hypothetically speaking, they're out one night and then they run out of gas. And then you get the call and someone's going, oh, I did it again. Sorry, can you help, okay? And I say, I'm going to airo you. It could mean, okay, I'm going to pick you up or I'm going to cut you off. Hey, if you're going to pick me up, that's awesome. I'll be right over here. If you're going to cut me off, that's a problem. Now, if you go to a vineyard, you'd actually see how this plays out, okay? A significant part of the gardener's job is to inspect the branches. Right? I need to come out, I need to do an inspection. Which ones are producing, which ones aren't producing, which ones are lying in the dirt and tangled up in the weeds, which ones that I can pick up and clean off. Like, is it still connected to the vine? Because if it is, there's still the opportunity that this can bear some fruit. It just needs to be picked up off of the ground, cleaned off, and then connected to a trellis or a support so it can produce. If you look at it that way and you understand that, you would go, okay, pick up might make a lot of sense, because that's what the gardener does. And again, this has huge implications for maybe some of you and maybe the way you grew up, and we talked a lot about this last week, and not to go back and rehash it, or maybe you picked up on these ideas somewhere that, you know, God, he is a cut me off kind of a gardener. Right? I didn't do enough good things. I didn't do the right kinds of good things. I'm not producing enough fruit in my life. And at any moment, right? And you live in fear, right? Any moment now, God's just going to cut me off, and there's been no warning whatsoever. And some of us, okay, you may actually sit here this morning and go, okay, with a little bit of introspection, and I understand what you're talking about. I know my life is not actually producing what God has called me to. Then simple step, okay? Then make sure that you're connected to the vine. And here's where we'll end up in a minute. You surrender yourself to the gardener. Okay, so maybe this is you, and you're like, in the dirt, I feel like I'm in the weeds, I feel like I'm kind of tangled up and struggling, but guess what? I'm still connected. Okay, I'm still holding on. I'm struggling, but I'm holding on. And here's the image, okay? He picks up the vine, he washes the dirt off, and then finds something to connect it to help it grow. He might set it up on a rock. More than likely, he's going to use other healthy branches, and we're going to intertwine these together so the branches are supporting each other. I would say relationships here in the church are one of the ways in which God wants to support you and help facilitate your growth, right? So be here, right? Connect. Lean on each other. Hold each other up, and God uses other branches to do that, okay? So you're not discarded. That's what I want you to hear. You're cared for. God's not cutting you off and saying, okay, sorry you didn't do it. Remember, growth is his job. Your job is to stay connected. And as long as you're connected, there's hope. So why? So he can produce fruit in our lives. So branches that are connected and need picked up. The second one is much more obvious, right? Branches that are connected and need pruned. Who's excited about that? Okay, this will be fun. See, pruning is a good thing. I was actually talking to another pastor Friday in the gym. We're having a conversation. He said, this is a pruning season for us at the church. In context of some people who were leaving the church, okay? So sometimes when someone's leaving your life and they're exiting and you're like, man, I thought they'd never move. The Lord's pruning, and we just embrace it. We go, this is really a positive thing, you know? I'd say most of the time we hear pruning and it just sounds bad. I don't want that. I don't have time for that. That's not helpful. This feels like a punishment. And the question we usually ask is, what did I actually do to deserve this? Jesus makes it clear, okay, that if you are connected to the vine and you are producing fruit, that pruning's not optional. He says every branch, and the gardener intentionally wounds the branch by cutting something away so it will produce even more fruit. I'd love to give you a personal example from my own, yard and garden, but y'all who know, I'm one letter away, okay, from the HOA for being penalized for the lack of upkeep, so I don't have the experience. Let me try this. As someone who grew up in the 80s, it was the best of everything. Anybody? Like, you grew up in the 80s and it was like, okay, the best music, the best fashion. It's even coming back, okay? It was so awesome that the mullet is coming back. Can you believe that? We go to, Jacksonville has an indoor football league team. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. And all of the music, 90% of the music is 80s music, and everybody loves it, okay? And the best movies. And one of the best, okay, movies is The Karate Kid. We're talking 1984, not 2010. Maybe you recognize this guy. I threw his picture up there. Mr. Miyagi, remember him? And this is from a scene where young Daniel-san comes in and Mr. Miyagi is trimming back these bonsai trees, and it's already pretty small, but he just kind of keeps clipping, and you're like, what? You need to stop eventually. And Daniel's trying to understand, okay, what are you trying to do? What kind of shape are you going for? And Mr. Miyagi just says, picture in head. Picture in head. Just trust picture. Right? You heard that? Just trust picture. And it kind of became a bit of a metaphor for their relationship and the kinds of things that Daniel was going to actually need to go through to get the results that he desired. That the pruning process is actually designed to lead to the picture. You just have to trust the picture or you will resist the pruning. As a branch, okay, you have to trust the picture that the gardener has in mind for you. This is how it works when I get a haircut, okay? And I sit down and I basically surrender myself to the process. And I say, I'm trusting you to do what I'm about to ask you to do. Now, you can decide if they do a good job or not. That's not what we're debating. I usually get my haircut on a Friday or a Saturday. So I tell them every time, listen, I need this to look good by Sunday. Okay, because a lot of people are going to be looking at this, and then that leads to a conversation, and I say, listen, I don't have the 2 weeks that you tell everybody, right? Hey, it'll all look great in 2 weeks. No, it needs to look good by Sunday, okay? And so I'm okay with a few little cuts and nothing too noticeable. But you know this, when you're the one being cut, like you questioned every snip. Like, was that intentional? What happened right there? I can't see what you're doing back there. And now I've just gotten to the point where I roll in there and say, listen, just cut the gray ones, and then it kind of starts a conversation. So I am choosing to trust, okay, that she can see something that I can't yet see. Pruning a lot of times looks like they overdid it. Right? Miyagi's cutting everything. She's cutting too much. I said number one, you went with the half, whatever. It's like if you've had a professional come and prune anything for you, many professionals will say that 70% of the growth should be cut back. And that can be painful, very painful. So nothing is actually for nothing, right? The precise strategic cuts help produce the most healthy branches, and everything can actually be used to achieve the picture in mind. Listen, God has a picture in mind for you, okay? And we must trust what it is when we can't always see it. You say, okay, well, what kinds of things does God actually prune in our life? Well, throw them into three big categories for you. One is what I would call diseased things, right? Diseased. Like something harmful and dangerous and is kind of growing in your life and you didn't address it or you didn't see it. And if we don't do that, eventually it will actually lead us to complete disconnection. So the gardener is going to prune the disease so the branch will produce. And maybe it comes through the conviction of the Holy Spirit. Right? You're a follower of Jesus. God says, hey, I will place my Holy Spirit inside of you to do a number of things. And one of them is to convict us of sin and things that are dangerous, to bring them to our attention and then guide us to the next steps to go forward. And it might be a moment where you're sitting here in the service where through a worship song or the reading of the scripture or something I say, you go, okay, wow, how did I miss that? Or, wow, God's really bringing that to my attention. I have got to take this next step, and I need to make that change, right? And it might be that he reveals to us things like a secret sin, right? Some kind of a toxic relationship, some kind of a really harmful habit. Or maybe something gets exposed in your life, right? You didn't actively try to do it. Oh, the text got found. Your idol got discovered, right? Or the lie got found out. And it's embarrassing. And it's costly. And sometimes it's life-altering. But we need to cut this thing back to actually keep it from spreading. And God sometimes just doesn't allow us to get away with it anymore. Or it happens through someone else, right? A trusted friend, a family member who loves you enough to have a conversation and say to you what nobody else is willing to say to you. And guess what? They probably didn't want to. They probably didn't want to have that conversation with you, but they cared enough to actually take a chance, right, to point out a relationship that wasn't healthy for you, like a habit that was hurtful, and that right there is the thing that most of us resist. And we go, listen, who do you think you are? and you got plenty of other stuff to keep yourself busy. I want you to mind your own business, right? And sometimes, okay, with enough time and distance, we can look back on that moment and go, wow, how much did they really love and care about me to actually step into that? But maybe you receive it and you make a change, and God's pruning away, okay, what we'll call disease so you can produce healthy fruit. That's one. The gardener prunes what I call distracting things, okay? Like some branches have, and some of you are way more experienced at this than me, they have what we call a sucker shoot or a sucker branch, okay? And I should have given you a picture of it, but it's just this little offshoot of the vine, and it's right there where the branch meets, and it doesn't do anything, okay? It doesn't produce anything, doesn't ever, yield any fruit, anything like that. It doesn't do anything, but it actually steals nutrients that should be actually going to the branch. It seems harmless, okay, and it's not necessarily destructive. I would just call it distracting, right? It's diverting energy and attention away from where it needs to go. It has to be cut, right? So we can get rid of the unnecessary stuff that keeps us from growing. I was just kind of thinking back over this a little bit, like what is a good example of distracting, and I'll actually go back 4 years ago, and we won't say the word, but you all know what happened 4 years ago, was a pruning. There was a pruning in pretty much everyone's life. Your vacation got pruned, right? Your sports got pruned. We have a daughter, her wedding got pruned, okay? Or your job got pruned. There was a lot of pruning happening right there. And for the most part, we resisted it, didn't we? Like, this is terrible. Like, there's just so much cutting back. But you know what happened? I had a lot more quiet in my life. I had a lot more time for reflection. I had a lot more time to connect with people who were like, you know what? We think you're healthy. Let's hang out together. And I had a lot more time to devote to, just giving attention, to my relationship with Jesus. And a lot of us, I remember back to this time, said, you know what? I can embrace this now, and I never want to go back to the way things were. And now here we are 4 years later going, you know what? Actually, I never want to go back to that. That's what I actually want to never go back to. It was a pruning season, though. And so maybe right now is a moment, and at least for me, to reassess, okay, is there something taking away my time and my energy and my attention that could be used so that God could produce something more productive in my life? I get a notification every Sunday morning that tells me how much screen time I've had in the last week. I could probably do some pruning. Anybody else? Do I need to watch one more docuseries on Netflix? Probably not, There's some pruning, okay, or some social media or some youth sports. I'll just throw that and leave it there. God may intervene, or he may prune some things, or he's going to lead us to actually make some changes with things that distract us because he has a picture in mind for you. And he will cut away, okay, dying and weak, and make room for stronger and more healthy. And then I'll give you this third category, which is, seems obvious. And listen, once you say diseased and distracting, it's like if I don't choose a D, like what is going on here? So this isn't the best choice. The best choice would be healthy, but I went with dynamic, so work with it, okay? He may even cut away something that is good so that he can produce something better. Now, it would seem that healthy branches should just be left alone, right? Hey, it's producing, it's doing awesome. Like, let's not mess with the formula over here, right? It seems counterintuitive that you understand what he's saying. We're literally going to cut away fruit in hopes that more and better fruit may possibly grow sometime in the future. That's what we're doing. But Jesus says, listen, the gardener prunes branches so they will bear even more fruit. So sometimes he cuts away what's even good in your life for something better and maybe bigger and maybe more healthy. We said last week that part of the fruit that maybe God wants to produce in your life sounds a lot like what a guy named Paul wrote in Galatians 5, right? He wants to produce things that are like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. And, it might be too personal for some of you, but I'm talking. And so I I feel like this kind of a pruning is something that's happening in my life right now. And I would say generally that things are going pretty well for me. You know, I go, okay, well, you know, family's really in good shape. I like what's happening there. You know, just my relationship with Jesus can always be better. I'm not the model here, but I feel like that's strong and it's growing. Things around here at the church, I feel like, oh man, there's always so many wins to celebrate. And it doesn't mean everything is perfect, but the general direction, okay, the trajectory of my life, I would go, yeah, that's good. I feel like it's growing. I feel like there's some fruit there. And at the same time, it feels like a lot of things are being cut back in my life. Or things are even being taken away, or things are actually being prevented from happening. And, you know, there's a few dead ends. I go, man, I wanted to do that and step into that. I really thought that was going to be a really good thing. And then maybe God stopped it, okay, because he has something better in mind. I've even been in a season recently where I have a couple of pastors who are really close. We're in this 3-year-long covenant group. Who have approached me about this, and my amazing wife, you know, so everybody's kind of saying the same thing at the same time. And it's really more of a challenging kind of a thing to say, hey, listen, not saying it's a bad thing, but I see this in you. Or, you know what, have you ever considered maybe stepping towards this thing over here? Or, you know, I think this might be an area where, you know, there's some growth for you. It's happening here with our church too. And you're like, well, I don't know that. That's why I'm telling you, okay? So it's happening here with our church too, where every week there are so many great things to celebrate. Like we sit in our staff meeting, we just share wins, and eventually we have to cut it off. We go, okay, enough celebrating, you know, we get it. And it's just been that way for a long time. And so the tendency for me is to go, okay, well, let's just keep going. Like, why wouldn't God want the good things to keep happening for us? And yet it feels like, okay, God's maybe moving me personally and us collectively into a whole new season of stuff. And I wish, okay, for me, and I wish for our church, like I knew exactly what was happening. Like, can't we just like hold on to the good and that's being produced? And it kind of reminds me, like, I would just like to know what God is up to. And so Wednesday, I told you last week, we have our 2-year-old granddaughter with us for a whole week. And my wife says, I don't think I can take her home by myself, so you come with me. And I said, if I go with you, we got to do it all in one day. So we drove to North Carolina, we dropped her off, unloaded her crap, got back in the car, and drove home. It's a whole trailer full of stuff, okay? And we left at 8 in the morning and we got home at like 8:30 in the evening. And part of that is South Carolina. Listen, I'm sorry if you're from there, but that's about the worst state we have out here on the East Coast. Your roads are bad. Your exits are bad. Even your Bojangles are bad, which is really hard to do. I don't understand how you can mess that one up. But we get diverted off the road. I can't remember how long it took us to get home. We're way up, and it's like, well, what is the problem up there? And it's just like 30 miles of orange cones in the right-hand lane, and nobody's working. You ever seen that one? And my wife goes, you know, I just wish I knew what the holdup was. And I do not want to know what the holdup is because that's not going to make it any better. And I think we feel that way with God sometimes, like, okay, I wish I knew exactly what was happening. So here's what I'm having to do right now is I'm having to lean into trusting the vision of the gardener. Right, there are new opportunities in front of us, and there are some things that are different and probably better. And I wish I knew exactly what that was going to look like, because right now I'm sharing it with you and it's in process. Which is a dangerous time to share these things, I know. But it's in process, and it's a little uncomfortable on this hand, but it's a little exciting on this hand. And some of it feels a little pointless right now. It's like, well, why is that so hard to do? That seems like a good thing. Or why is this relationship so difficult? That seems like a really good thing. Or why is this going that way, or that thing right there isn't happening? So I'm just choosing to believe that God has a picture in mind, so it must be purposeful. I should have made this a note. I'll give you a heads up. You should probably write it down. I think it's important. Pruning is not punishment. It's preparation. Pruning is not punishment. You probably didn't do anything wrong. It's preparation so that God can produce even more fruit. So the question is, okay, well, when will all this happen? When will the production and the fruit appear? Well, a Christian author named Margaret Feinberg wrote a book called Scouting the Divine, and she spent some time with a master vine dresser in California. And here are some of the observations. This is a long-term investment. Okay, generally speaking, it'll take 3 years after a vine is planted to bear fruit. Not what you wanted to hear, was it? For 3 years, the gardener's lifting, cutting, and pruning. In the 4th year, a small harvest that is then fermented for 2 years. They put the grapes through the winemaking process. They're washed, they're smashed, they're bottled up, they're shipped. It is about 8 to 9 years to the first bottle of wine and your first dollar. So if you were thinking, hey, you know what we need to do is start a vineyard. Okay, 8 to 9 years to the first bottle of wine, your first dollar. And many of you wine enthusiasts, that's not me, but some of you are like, oh, what year is the bottle? Because, right, the older, or what we might say, the longer the waiting, the better. So if you're in a season where it feels like, okay, I'm being picked up right now, you're being pruned, and it doesn't make sense, and you're kind of wondering, okay, when am I going to see the results? Not what you want to hear, but it sounds like just wait a little bit. You got to wait a little bit. First house we ever lived in had this tree in the backyard that was relatively young, and at about 2 feet off the ground, it had branched off in 2 directions. Okay, and so I'm like, well, it seems fine to me. And even though it kind of looked healthy, it looked like it's going to grow and it's going to be strong, apparently my wife informed me that it was actually weak and one of those branches needed to be cut off. Now, she learned this because she was up late one night with one of our kids watching HGTV, and then suddenly she's a gardener, okay? So she said, we need to cut off one of the branches so it will actually grow straight and strong. And I'm like, well, we're not doing that. That doesn't make any sense. And then the next day I'm out there with this handsaw and I'm cutting off one of the branches at the point of connection. And you know what happened? I mean, surely, slowly, over time, that thing started to straighten up and become more healthy and more productive. See, there's a picture of your life that I think you and I can't completely see in this moment, but the gardener can. So, a couple of questions for reflection. We're going to baptize, we're going to sing, and we'll go have a snow cone. One, do you need to be picked up? Do you need to be picked up? Do you have branches that need pruned? Right? Is there anything in your life you would go, okay, I think that needs to be thinned out, or I feel like I'm overcommitted here. I might be a little unable to give my best here. And what if you put that time and that energy into something better, or just putting yourself in position so that God can produce this thing in your life? Is there anything in your life right now that seems painful or maybe pointless, and it could actually be preparation for something better? Remember, the goal is to actually see more fruit. And the way that we produce fruit is not on our own, like we're not the one that does that. It's through connection to Jesus. So here's the really big question is, can you trust the gardener? I mean, can you trust the gardener, right? And we have to resist the temptation to think that if it's hard, right, if it's difficult, if there's a struggle, that's bad, or I need to fight against this change, and that's not it at all. I would even encourage you, and this is what I will do with my final minute, is to not just say, okay, I can accept that and I can tolerate that, but to go ahead and ask God for it. Okay, well, why would I do that? Why would I ask God for, pruning or whatever? And the reason is that the pruning that we ask for is typically not as painful as the pruning that we don't ask for. Right now I can ask God, hey God, let's do some work here. Can you use the scissors before we have to pull out the chainsaw? Anybody? See, last week we talked about very simple things for connection, okay, like Bible reading and prayer. These are like staples of building the relationship with Jesus. So as you're doing that, like whatever your rhythm is, hey, if it's daily, if it's weekly, or however you find that connection, you're constantly asking, okay, what needs to go or be cut back, or what needs to be changed? God, would you route me the right direction? Because I'd much rather initiate those changes then have God kind of insert himself into the situation. See, God sees the picture and he has a purpose in mind, and it is to produce in you the life that he desires, and I would always say the life that I think we all truly want. So I'm going to pray. We're going to sing. We're going to celebrate baptism. I think if you're a follower of Jesus, it's a great day to maybe connect with him through communion or the Lord's Supper. You'll find it in the back of the seat in front of you. And that's something Jesus instituted on the night that he delivers this message from John 15. Say, hey, that bread is going to represent my body. That juice or that wine is going to represent my blood. Have a moment to connect or reconnect with me. And maybe it's just a way to say, hey, God, thank you that you're the true vine. Thank you for that. So God, today we say thank you for these words. God, thank you that even though they are difficult, I pray that our application, God, has been truthful and helpful. So God, most of all today, I would just pray for strength and courage to take the step today to declare that we do indeed trust the vision that you have for us. And God, if it's painful, God, help us to see it as your preparation. And that we would find a way to give you the thanks in the middle of it, because we know that there's something beautiful on the other side of it. We're going to pray these things in your name today. Amen.